how do Liverpool replace a club and Premier League legend in Mo Salah? If he were to leave in the summer, we'll step into the shoes of the transfer committee at Liverpool and try and answer that massive question. This will be the first of a 3-part series into how Liverpool could replace their 3 out of contract players in Virgil van Dijk, Trent Alexander-Arnold and Mo Salah. I've thought about numerous players that could potentially arrive at Liverpool, but in today's episode, I'll be breaking down 3 potential right-wing targets. And they are Bryan Mbeumo, Takefusa Kubo and Mohammed Kudus, to see who could be the best fit for that right wing spot. And just like my previous transfer video on Newcastle, we'll be looking into 3 critical factors that could play a part. And they are the player profile, so that is what do their stats and traits reveal, the tactical fit, and that involves how would they adapt to Liverpool's style of play and their system under Arne Slot. And lastly, the transfer costs. And that includes how attainable is the player and are they worth the price that Liverpool may have to pay. By the end of this video, hopefully we would have found the perfect replacement for Mo Salah, but we'll also be exploring whether Liverpool have to rethink their entire approach to replacing one of the Premier League's greatest ever players. So before we even jump into analysing the 3 potential right-wing targets, we have to look into the impact that Mo Salah has made in the Premier League. Now this is Mo Salah's 8th season in the Premier League with Liverpool, and if you look at his output in terms of goals and assists, you can see why he's one of the best attackers to grace the Premier League. You know, he's got over 20 goals in the majority of seasons, and when he hasn't, he's then contributing at least 10 assists in that Premier League season. Mo Salah is averaging 31 goals and assists per season. This is 8 seasons worth of data, and he's already achieving that level of output. And in terms of the creator aspect of his game, you know, he's averaging 10 assists per season. He's already tied, I can't believe it, he's tied his assist record for the season, and we're only over halfway. You know, 13 assists this season. His last time where he got 13 assists was in the 21-22 Premier League season, and it's just going to be so difficult for Liverpool to replace him in the summer. So what skill set does Salah bring to Liverpool, and what can we pick apart to try and identify a potential replacement in the summer? And if you look at his data radar from the last 365 days, the last year, which is compared to the Big 5 leagues and the European competition, the Champions League, you know, the level of output, look at the attacking output here. He's in the 99th percentile for non-penalty XG, assists, expected assisted goals, non-penalty XG and expected assisted goals. And then you look at his shot creating actions, he's in the 80th percentile, and the non-penalty goals are in the 90th percentile. You know, his level of output is hard to match from any signing anywhere across Europe. And that's why you have to look at his progressive passes, his progressive carries, which shows even further why it's harder to replace him. You know, he's only in the 64th percentile for progressive passes. He's only in the 53rd percentile for progressive carries. You know, he's not really taking people on as much as he was in previous seasons, but he's still got this insane level of output, which shows how efficient he is in terms of the level of passing ability to create those assists, and in terms of his shot taking and, you know, the selection of shots he's taken and the quality of the shots that he's taken as well. He was only 25 years old when Liverpool bought him. Although he wasn't achieving his prime level of form like he is at Liverpool, you can see that he had signs of being both the goal machine and the creator if he was to be bought by Liverpool. And Ian Graham, he even said in his book, and I think he said it in interviews as well, you know, he was tainted. Salah was tainted by this experience at Chelsea that put off all other Premier League clubs, and Liverpool were able to sweep him away and take him to the Premier League, you know, without any real competition for his signature. But Premier League clubs are a lot more data driven, and they're less influenced by bias in their decision making. And that's why trying to get Salah's replacement will face heavy competition from other Premier League clubs. Make sure to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content and support the channel further. And we'll be jumping into the player profiles of the 3 mentioned targets in the next segment, as well as a new approach that Liverpool may choose to deal with the loss of Mo Salah. So let's jump into the player profiles of the 3 mentioned targets. But before we do so, let's think about what are the requirements that Liverpool may want from this Mo Salah replacement. And to answer that, we have to take into account that Liverpool hired a new sporting director in Richard Hughes, and it will be his first proper summer transfer window at the club. And if we look at the player profiles of the players that he was signing at Bournemouth and what enticed Liverpool to try and get him into their club, you know, he was looking at young, undervalued talent with high potential ceilings. The likes of Kirkes, Zabani, Semenyo, rather than the seasoned names. And that's something to take into account as we look at our targets. The average age of his permanent signings at Bournemouth was around 24 years old, and he had a history of signing players that were sidelined at big clubs, and that's something to keep into account for one of the players that I'll be looking into. But overall, we're looking at a player that's probably 26 and under. I would usually say 24, 25, but given how good Mo Salah is, you might want to buy someone that's a bit more established than the other players that they may be looking for. And then you're thinking about Champions League experience, maybe an international, someone with a high potential ceiling. They may not be doing it, right now in terms of goals and assists or hitting the levels of Mo Salah or some of the other attackers at Liverpool. But when they play for Liverpool, they may be able to reach that with the coaching of Arne Slot. They'll be looking for someone that can score the goals and create them, not someone that can do either or. And then you've got someone that could potentially run in behind, carry the same level of threat as Mo Salah and some of the other Liverpool attackers. Someone that's adaptable to the Premier League, has that physical profile in terms of the stamina, the pace, being able to deal with the physicality of the league. And lastly, someone that could be probably a bit more positionally flexible, not only can play in the right wing, but can drift into half spaces or play on the opposite wing potentially as well. And so there's some players that I've ruled out from this analysis. And that include the likes of Rafinha, playing for Barcelona. His age profile probably isn't quite there, and he's probably happy at Barcelona as well. You have Jared Bowen, he's injured at the moment with a broken foot, but he's probably just hit that age profile where he's probably not in his absolute prime. And, they probably want someone a bit younger at this moment in time. Kvaratskhelia, who probably plays more of a left winger. It would probably be too much of an adjustment to move him to that right wing. Even though he is talented, he might be able to do it. But for the purpose of this analysis, I've kept it to people who have played right wing consistently. And lastly, the likes of Leroy Sané, who is that right winger, could be available. But he's probably hit that age that, Liverpool wouldn't want to go and recruit. I think he's 29 years old. They're the players that I've kind of ruled out. And we'll jump into the three players, starting with Mohammed Kudus. And if you look at his stats from the Eredivisie, before he made that move to West Ham, you can see in that full season, the last one before he made the move to West Ham, that he had 11 goals and 4 assists. And as he transitioned to the Premier League with West Ham, in his first full season, adapting to the Premier League, he got 8 goals and 6 assists. And that shows that he can be the goal sort of machine that you want him to be potentially in the future, but he also is able to create from that right wing position. And when buying a player, you always want to think about what is the unique strength that player will bring to your club, especially from an attacking position. And if you look at his FUF radar, we'll compare it to Salah as well at the same time. Look at his successful take-ons. He's in the 99th percentile for take-ons. It is insane, especially when you watch some of his clips, how easy it is for him to bypass players in the attacking third and retain the ball under pressure. His progressive carries and his take-ons are above Salah's over the last year's worth of data, although Salah has a slightly altered role under Arne Slot. His defensive contributions in terms of tackles and assists is definitely up there, and he can provide that value from a defensive perspective. But his output in terms of goals and assists are where he needs to improve on a consistent basis to be able to replace Mo Salah. But he definitely has the technique and ability to finish. If you look at his goal against Arsenal at home, I think it was last season, and you see the kind of technical ability he shows, it is incredible. It's a cross-field switch, I think it's from Aguerd, and he's actually on the run to try and catch this ball up. And he takes it on the bounce, literally on the full bounce, and stuns it to the left-hand side, takes Zinchenko out of the game, and he's able to whip it into the bottom left-hand corner. And he has the level of technique and finishing ability to produce this potentially on a consistent basis for Liverpool. And Kudus has shown that he's also a creator. He's able to get assists in his first season at West Ham, but he does it in a different way. He has that vision and execution. He's a really good passer of the ball. He likes those short and medium line splitting passes rather than the long range switches. But it's how he does it. He doesn't do it from Salah's position out wide. He drifts into the half space, finds the pockets, and he's able to execute from that position. And if you look at his assists against Burnley away last season, you can see all his traits encapsulated into one. He receives a fizz ball from Ward-Prowse, I think it is, into his feet. You can see the half space position that he's picking it up in between those 4 players. He's comfortable receiving it in tight spaces, and his technique to take all the pace off the ball on the bounce, turn, and that's where the magic happens. As he turns with the ball, the centre back comes up to press him, but he just shifts it away from him, moves it away into space, protects the ball from number 19 coming in on the press, and that's where he starts to take on players and then feint inside, but then also drag it on the outside for a cross. And he draws a low, hard cross into the box, which deflects over, I think it's O'Shea, into his own net. But that shows all his technical abilities encapsulated into one. His first touch under pressure, the way that he shifts it away from players and takes on players, with no problem at all. And he's still able to deliver on his weaker foot with the cross into the box. And Mohammed Kudus has flair. The ability to do the unexpected, which is perfect against low blocks, which Liverpool face on a consistent basis. He has that overhead kick against Man City at the Etihad. He ran through the whole of the Freiburg midfield and defence in the Europa Conference League. And it's a great quality to have in a top team. He has that Champions League experience, 4 goals and 2 assists. He's a Ghana international. He's shown it in the World Cup, on the world stage as well. He's won the Eredivisie twice, which is great for a team that's chasing a title season on season. His injury history is, dotted with some previous injuries early on in his career, but not much since moving to West Ham. And he's still not hit his prime. That's probably the best bit. In that bracket of 24 to 25 years old, he could show that level of ability to get goals and assists on a consistent basis, which would be exciting for Richard Hughes and Liverpool. Next up is Bryan Mbeumo, and he's 25, turning 26 in the summer, and he's on the borderline of that age requirement that I think Liverpool might be looking for. Although, as I said previously, Mo Salah is a player that you're losing a lot of goals, a lot of assists, and you might want someone that's a bit more ready-made in that position. He's comfortable on that right wing with his left foot cutting in. He can use his weaker foot as well, but he can also play as a second striker or striker for Liverpool. And he has 9 goals in his previous 2 seasons and 13 goals already in this season, and we're only just above halfway. And I think they only had 2 penalties in that time. And if you look at the top Premier League goal scorers from this season, he's 3rd in that list. And look at some of the other names, likes of Haaland, Isak, Cole Palmer, playing for some very, very big clubs. He's playing for Brentford week in, week out. I think they have around 47% possession in average this season. And it's one where, if he's able to play for a club that has the ball a bit more, can he produce more goals and assists? And if you look at his FBref radar, his is probably the most interesting because it's the most similar to Mo Salah's. If you look at the progressive passes, the progressive carries, the kind of shape of the FBref radar as it moves around, the place where it probably lacks is the attacking output. But the one key element is if you look at non-penalty goals, he's very close to Mo Salah. If he's able to play in a team, like I said, that, has the ball a bit more, he's able to assist a bit more, get into positions where he can create a bit more and have more time on the ball, he might be able to replicate what Mo Salah's doing. And that's probably the most exciting part about potentially getting Mbeumo at Liverpool. And if you look at his goal against Crystal Palace from earlier on in the season, it's very Salah-like. As Norgard gets this ball, he plays it into Visser's feet on the transition, and Mbeumo's already away, making that run in behind, and it's Mark Gay who's attempted to track him. And as Visser plays that ball in behind, you have a situation where Mbeumo's squaring up 1v1 with Mark Gay, and you know what he wants to do, just like you know what Mo Salah wants to do. He wants to cut in on that left foot and have a shot on goal, and it's exactly what he does. Shimmies and feints inside of Mark Gay, and he just blasts it into that bottom left-hand corner. Now, I analysed Mbeumo in full in my transfer video for Newcastle because I think he could be a target for other Premier League clubs, but he's also a creator, and that's what you want from this Salah replacement. You want someone that can score the goals and create. And he's had 7, 8 and 6 assists in the previous seasons for Brentford in the Premier League. And he's able to drift into that half space. He has the technique, the vision, the passing ability to thread balls into runners that are making runs into the box. When you add how hard he works off the ball for that Brentford side, he has a lot of qualities from both a defensive and attacking perspective that will be great at Liverpool. And the next player profile is Takefusa Kubo. And he's someone I didn't watch too much before this episode, but in the lead up to this episode, I definitely wanted to check out a bit more about what he was about. And he's 23, turning 24 this summer, and he probably has, out of the 3 targets, the highest potential ceiling as to what he could do. He has an insane level of technical ability on the ball, his ability to take on players, and he's also his technical ability in terms of his first touch. Keeping that ball under pressure is exciting to see. Kubo previously played for Barcelona and La Masia. He went back to Japan and was subsequently bought by Real Madrid. And I think this is the kind of thing that I was talking about in terms of Richard Hughes' profile. Buying those sideline players from big clubs, and making them into something at his current club. And Kubo definitely has that pedigree, playing for the previous clubs that he did. But then he went off to Real Sociedad, and in his first season, he got 9 goals and 7 assists. That's exciting to see. The one that can score goals and create them. And he carried it on, 7 goals and 4 assists in his next season. He's only scored 3 goals and doesn't have any assists this season so far. But Sociedad actually started off pretty poorly this season, and he's starting to find the form now towards the middle and hopefully carry it on towards the end of the season as well. But let me remind you of his age. He's 23 turning 24 this summer. When he scored that 9 goals and 7 assists, he was only 21 years old, playing in La Liga, achieving Champions League football for Real Sociedad. In that next season when he got 7 goals and 4 assists in La Liga, he was also playing in European football in the Champions League. And, it's something where he has that pedigree already playing in international and European competitions, international with Japan, he's in an international setup. And it reminds me a little bit, this season of Alexander Isak. And by that I mean, this season doesn't look overly impressive. And when Newcastle, my team, bought Isak from Real Sociedad, he had a great season the year before. But in the season we bought him, he actually wasn't in form. And it's one way, if you can see that talent when they're not in form and you're able to replicate it in future seasons, they could pick up a little bit of a bargain here, in the summer transfer window. And if you look at the FBref radar, comparing him to Mo Salah, you can see the key difference is that attacking output. As I said, the attacking output from the previous 2 seasons actually was pretty good. It's his current season which probably lets him down in terms of the last year's worth of data. But if you look at the technical ability, progressive passes, progressive carries, successful take-ons, his ability on the ball is never in question. And as I said, we always look for this unique quality from a signing. What do they bring that's above the average of a good player? And his take-on ability is amazing. If you look at the take-ons from La Liga in his current season, you can see he loves that right wing position. He loves to take players on in and around the box and create for his team. And if you look at the FBref radar again, when comparing him to Mo Salah, the one interesting thing to see is his shot creating actions. He's actually not far away from Mo Salah, which means he's creating the opportunities for Real Sociedad to have shots on goal, but they're not quite taking it maybe, for him to get his assists. And looking at this game from earlier on in the season against Alaves, he picks up a right-sided position slightly deeper than the other attackers, and it's the striker who's moved out to the right wing, making a run in behind the fullback. And he has no hesitation in playing a long distance pass on the ground, flat, in between the midfield and defensive line and in behind the fullback. And he does it with very little follow through, just punching that ball through with the right amount of weight and pace on the ball. And he creates a shot on goal for the striker. And similarly, when I talk about his take-on ability, and similar to Mbeumo and Kudus in this right wing position, if he gets faced up one-on-one with a defender on the edge of the box, you know what he wants to do, but it's very hard to stop. But the impressive thing is not just coming inside, it's the amount of shifts and shimmies and how close he keeps that ball when he's dribbling. And he takes the ball inside, sitting the defender on the floor with the amount of shifts and shimmies and fake shots that he's having on goal, and just absolutely drills it into that bottom left-hand corner. And he's one of those players that he's probably not producing the goals and assists this season, but he's proven in previous seasons in the Liga he can do it. And that's what we want. We want someone that can score goals and create them, but still be a threat in general play. Now let's look at the tactical fit of these 3 players for Liverpool. And normally I would assess the system that Liverpool already have in place and the players that they would have to mesh with in the squad down that right hand side. But there's 2 factors to consider when trying to analyse the tactical fit of these players. And one of them is, will Trent stay at Liverpool? And the second is, how will Slot adjust his tactics once Salah leaves? Now, if Trent and Salah leave in the summer transfer window, that leaves a big gaping hole down that right-hand side. And so it's hard to plug and drop one of these players, the 3 targets of Mbeumo, Kudus or Kubo, into that right wing position without knowing exactly how Slot might set up his team. He finally has money to spend. They didn't spend that much in the last transfer window, and I don't think they'll spend too much in the January transfer window. And then when you add the wages of Trent, Salah and potentially Van Dijk off the wage books, they could have room to buy a big high quality signing in both the right back position and the right wing position. As I said earlier, Slot might consider a new tactical approach or personnel approach in that front line. Trying to replace Salah's goals and output in terms of assists with just one player might not work. So instead, I think he might also consider buying a new central striker. This is Darwin Núñez's 3rd season at Liverpool and the first under Arne Slot, and he hasn't quite nailed that starting position. And I don't know if he actually fits what Slot is looking for from this Liverpool team. Diogo Jota is probably a bit more closer to what he might want in that central striker position, able to run in behind, but also drop deep and link play. But he's also quite injury prone. But this might be a situation where Liverpool go for a top central striker. The likes of Gyökeres, Sesko, Marmoush, Vlahovic could be available in the summer, and it could be an option they use to replace Salah's goals. He may also develop the shape and the tactical system. Would he go for 2 strikers up top to replace Salah's goals rather than a right winger and a central striker? It's all interesting to see exactly how he replaces Salah's output, but he might not do it just with one player, and that's something to keep an eye on in the summer. Now let's jump into the transfer availability and cost of the 3 players. But before doing so, we have to acknowledge that Liverpool have a lot of headroom in both the budget, in terms of they haven't really spent that much in previous transfer windows, and if they let go of Van Dijk, Trent and or Salah, they'll have a lot of headroom in terms of the wage structure. Now, if we jump onto Bryan Mbeumo, he has a transfer market value of 50 million euros, which is around 41 million pounds. His contract expires in June 2026, but it looks like the club have a year extension option on his contract according to Transfer Market. And if you think about the type of price that Liverpool want to pay for players, they like the undervalued players, someone they can pick up with resale value later on. Bryan Mbeumo is probably looking at 65, 70, 75 million to even start discussing a transfer. And although his goal output and assist output is probably one of the best out of the 3 rumored targets, we have to think about what kind of price would Liverpool want to play. I still think that he would be worth that amount of money, but Brentford would be hard sellers. They're known to sort of keep their players for a long amount of time, restrict the transfers out of the club unless they get the price that they want. So that's something to consider for Liverpool in their sort of negotiating position for the players. His wage structure is around £45,000 per week, according to Capology. I don't think they'll have any issue meeting the wages of any of these players, but I think it's the transfer value that probably would be the predominant factor for each of these players. Now onto Mohammed Kudus, and his transfer market value is around 50 million euros, which again is around 42 million pounds. But compared to Mbeumo, his contract expires in June 2028. So there's a decent amount of years left. Plus, I think West Ham have a sort of ability to extend by a further year, which makes it even harder. And they paid around 40 million pounds for him anyway. So that makes his transfer market value hard to predict, but it would be a costly one for Liverpool. And his wage structure could be the most difficult to meet out of the 3 targets I've explored. He's on around £90,000 per week, according to Capology. And although they could meet a potential wage structure for him, it's whether they would want to. He'll probably break the bank a bit more than the other 2 players. Now on to Kubo, and he has a transfer market value of 40 million euros, which is around 34 million pounds, but his contract does expire in June 2029. Although Transfer Market does say that he has a release clause of around 60 million euros, Capology says the same thing, and that is far more sort of within the budget and the realm of what Liverpool might want to pay for a right winger. Capology has his wage structure at around 48,000 per week, and I don't think it'll be tricky for Liverpool to meet his wage demands. But the other interesting fact, something that probably clubs take into account is the huge commercial opportunity. The Japanese fan base is a big one, and having Kubo on the back of a Liverpool shirt is something that could sell quite a lot of shirts in the Japanese market. Now, if you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment down below. Who would you choose to replace Mo Salah out of these 3 targets? And is there anyone I haven't considered that you think would be a great fit for Liverpool? So out of these 3 targets, who would be the best player to replace Mo Salah if he were to leave in the summer? Now, if Arne Slot is not trying to change the system too much, and we're looking at these 3 players as a potential target, let's go through them one by one. I think Kudus is one where he has an insane amount of talent on the ball. The ability to take on a player, 1-2 players at a time, create from deep. He is one where you would need to adjust the tactics a little bit. He likes to drift into that half space a bit more than Kubo and Mbeumo. The thing about Kudus is that transfer costs, both in the wages and the price you would have to pay to get him out of West Ham. And I think that's where you have to look towards the likes of Kubo now, who's a bit cheaper, potentially has a release clause. He has a similar ability to take on a player, probably doesn't have that goal output of Kudus at the moment this season, but he's shown last season that he does, and the season before that, the ability to have goals in his game and create as well. But then with him, he is probably more potential than Kudus and Mbeumo. He does have that star quality, the technique, the underlying technique that I look for from players. He has that in abundance. But it's about what they want right now. Do they want to invest in someone that's a bit more ready-made than Kubo? Or do they want to take a punt on his potential to reach that higher ceiling? But then you have Mbeumo in the Premier League already. The goal output from him, 13 goals this season, is something you can't look beyond. His ability to run in behind is a lot better than Kubo and Kudus, which fits Arne Slot's system. He likes players that like to run aggressively in behind. And he is probably the most similar to Salah in terms of just that efficiency in front of goal and his ability to cut inside and have shots in goal as well. But I think if they're not trying to change the system too much, my personal fit would be Mbeumo, and especially when you count in the fact that he has that positional flexibility, the ability to play striker as well if they need him to. But I think all round as a package, especially with the cost of Mbeumo, it probably would be a bit higher than Kubo, but I think it'll be less than Kudus. I think if they could get Mbeumo for around £75 million, £70 million, I think it'll be a great buy. And I think the scary thing about Mbeumo is that although he's 25, turning 26, he hasn't quite hit his prime yet. Playing for a team that creates lots of chances, making that big move at a great time in his career, it could be one he actually explodes, and we actually don't know his potential ceiling. So I think if I was Liverpool's transfer committee, Mbeumo would be the name that I'll be sliding through to Richard Hughes and Arne Slot, and I think he would be a great capture for Liverpool. And make sure to check out a couple of my previous videos tactically analysing Arne Slot's Liverpool this season, and I'll see you on the next episode of A Game of Two Halves.